famous for what they survived. A personality, a VIP, history in the headlines. Whatever happened to, let's get the latest news. Hey, whatever happened to you?
Hi, I'm Doug Thompson. Welcome to this edition of Hey, Whatever Happened To, a show that takes a look each week at another celebrity from Kansas or with a strong connection. You won't find anybody with a stronger connection to Kansas than Dwight David Eisenhower, 34th President of the United States, Supreme Commander during World War II, 5-star general. We're going to go to the Eisenhower Center and visit with the director, Carl Weisenbach, for one of the best interviews I think we've done on one of the individuals who's not only well known through Kansas but worldwide, and always took pride and great pride in the fact he was from Abilene, Kansas. And so stand by, because we're going to go to Eisenhower Center next, and if you're ever in the area, go by the Eisenhower Center. It is the most beautiful library, presidential library and facility you'll ever run into. Thanks for watching.
Hey, whatever happened to you?
Welcome to Hey, Whatever Happened To, and this week's show is on President Dwight D. Eisenhower from Abilene, Kansas. I'm visiting with Carl Weisenbach, the director of the entire complex. And Carl, we're in the presidential office, Dwight Eisenhower's presidential office, and he actually used this office on occasion when he came back, didn't he?
He sure did. In fact, we think he probably used the office about 10 times. And I decided to reopen the office because I wanted people to have an opportunity to see exactly where Eisenhower worked when he did come out to Abilene in the years after he left the presidency. It certainly is an honor to be the director of the Presidential Library, Museum, and Boyhood Home, as we say. But more important, I think it's an honor to also work in this office, knowing that this is where President Eisenhower would go to do whatever paperwork he needed to, but also visit with old friends in Abilene, which he had many.
Yes.
And he would enjoy showing people his a globe that we have over in the corner, talking about where he was in the Second World War. And so I'm mindful that, you know, this is President Eisenhower's office, and I also think that I need to try to keep as many of his mementos as possible in this office to demonstrate Eisenhower's connection to Abilene and Kansas.
He has many of his personal items here in the office yet, doesn't he?
He really does, and we also have a book collection that, if you look on the wall back there, in the bookcase back there, you'll see a pretty good sized book collection, and that came from a donor who felt that Eisenhower should be versed in every subject imaginable. Now, Doug, I really doubt that Eisenhower spent very much time going through the books, right? I think his emphasis was more on, you know, greeting visitors and talking about the Second World War and what he did during the presidency and so forth.
You know, I think he was extremely proud of his family, of the connections to Abilene, and I think you're right. He built lifelong relationships with people here in Abilene, and he was an amazing person. And the fact that you use his office for the duties that you do here is tremendous. I know when I came in and I told your assistant, Samantha Kinner, your communications director, I said, you know, it's amazing up here that these are Eisenhower's personal items, and he's got a picture of you and your son playing some soccer, and you've got your daughter's picture up here. Of course, they were brought in later by you, weren't they?
Yes, yes, yes.
Did you ever meet Ike?
No, I never met the president. I certainly read a lot about Eisenhower. That's the result of being with the National Archives since 1979. And I was head of the Nixon project, which dealt with the Nixon tapes and papers and so forth. And of course, you know, Nixon was Eisenhower's vice president. So I had a pretty good idea about some of the issues that Eisenhower dealt with as president of the United States. But I also became very curious about Eisenhower, the man, Eisenhower, the general, Eisenhower's post-World War career before he became president and so forth. So I think that's one of the reasons why I was intrigued into coming out to Abilene, because he was such a remarkable individual. You know, we are a unique institution as it pertains to the presidential library system. Keep in mind, there are 13 presidential libraries in the U.S. There are only 13 presidential libraries in the world. No other nation has a system of presidential libraries like we do. And I point that out only because some of the things that we have here are different from what you'll find at other presidential libraries. For example, at this particular presidential library, we have about 22 or 23 acres. We are the only, which is the largest presidential library in the system in terms of acreage. We are the only presidential library that operates a Boyhood Home. And we acquired that Boyhood Home from the foundation. At one time, the presidential library belonged to the foundation when the family gave it to the foundation. But eventually, the foundation gave it to the National Archives. So that makes us unique. Now, a lot of people will say, well, I was at the Truman Library and they have a Boyhood Home. That Boyhood Home is not operated by the foundation or the library. It's operated by the National Park Service. In fact, at Nixon, their presidential home is operated by the foundation. So we have the added joy, if you will, of operating 5 buildings, including the Boyhood Home.
When we come back from break, Carl, I want to go into talking about the Boyhood Home and how Eisenhower family got here. We've got to take a short break. We'll be right back after this break. Stay tuned to Hey, Whatever Happened to Dwight Eisenhower.
Hey, whatever happened to you?
Welcome back to Hey, Whatever Happened to Dwight Eisenhower. We're at the Eisenhower Presidential Library right now. I'm visiting with Carl Weisenbach, who's the director, and we're in President Eisenhower's personal office when he was back here, and you said he had used this at least 10 times, give or take. How did the Eisenhower family wind up in Abilene, Kansas?
Well, the Eisenhower family were part of the migration from Pennsylvania to Kansas in the 1860s, I think it was. And the family lived right across from us. Eventually, in that particular house, all of the boys were born here except for one, and that was our hero, Dwight Eisenhower. He was born in Denison, Texas in 1890. He lived there for about 2 or 3 years, came back to Abilene. The family returned back to Abilene. I know that Texas claims Eisenhower as their own, but we here in Abilene know that Abilene's hometown was Abilene, Kansas, and he was always proud of Abilene, Kansas.
Sure.
He talked about Abilene, Kansas all the time in his speeches and so forth. And his presidential library is in Abilene, Kansas. He could have had the presidential library in New York at Columbia University, for example,
right,
or in Gettysburg. But he wanted to make the point that his hometown is in Abilene, Kansas. This is where he grew up. This is where he was molded. This is a town that prepared him for his military career and his presidency. So with all due respect to Denison, Ike is an Abilene boy.
Well, I can understand why they would claim him that he was born there. That's a distinction they would like to have. Right. But his formative years were here in Abilene, and I heard him say in one of his speeches, and I don't know if it was an acceptance speech or what it was, that he said, proudest thing I can say is that I'm from Abilene.
And he said that, and if you also look at some of the statements he made during the Second World War, he would talk about growing up in Abilene. If he found out, for example, that there was a kid from Kansas, he would actually try to find that kid and chat and so forth and talk about the good old days in Abilene and or in Kansas. So he was a Kansan through and through.
I can remember we did for this show that Hey, Whatever Happened to, we've done a military hero segment, and I can remember one of the individuals that we was interviewing said that he was at one of those unit meetings, and then General Eisenhower came in and hollered out, he said, anybody here from Abilene? Mm-hmm. And the kid raised his hand and he said, who are you? And he told him, I know your family. and they had a little conversation, and then he went on to his other duties. But he was very much in love with the community and the community with him. How did all of this come about? Because is there a foundation, or how did all this occur?
Yeah, it's kind of a convoluted chronology, right? So I'll try not to get into the weeds. But the bottom line is that the Eisenhower home was already, here on the grounds, right? But in the mid-1940s, there was an effort by the state of Kansas to honor Eisenhower.
Because of his war record?
Because of his war record. Keep in mind, by 1945, he wasn't just a national hero, he was an international hero. He was a savior, if you will. He was a great liberator,
right,
and so forth. And there was a movement afloat to thank Eisenhower, to commemorate his service and so forth. So there was a foundation created. It was called the Eisenhower Foundation. It is the same Eisenhower Foundation that is active in the community. The Eisenhower Foundation succeeded in taking control of the Boyhood Home, and eventually the Eisenhower Foundation was also responsible for creating a museum to house Eisenhower's military career, or to tell the story about Eisenhower's military career. But it was also to honor the veteran, the American soldier too. So it had a dual purpose. But Eisenhower became president in 1953, and as time went by, there was a realization that there may be a presidential, library. And if Eisenhower does have a presidential library, where will it go? So there was a movement afloat in the state of Kansas to have that Eisenhower presidential library here in Abilene. So eventually, the foundation acquired, or raised money, if you will, thanks to Eisenhower, to have the Eisenhower Library building, presidential library building, which houses about 28 million pages and so forth, which we can talk about a little bit as well. So that's kind of a history, a brief history, if you will, of how the library came into the hands of the foundation, which was created by the state of Kansas. But at some point, keep in mind too that once the library was built and so forth, it was turned over to the federal government. Which means that there is a federal presence here, on the grounds of the presidential library. Which means that I should say, the federal government is in charge of the museum building, the place of meditation, which has its own unique story.
Sure.
The library building, and so forth. We have a building to the right of us here as well. So there are 5 structures on the grounds, which are managed by the National Archives. However, there is a funding issue that might be of interest as well. The federal government is responsible for maintaining these buildings, including the Boyhood Home, the museum, the library building, the place of meditation. They provide, the federal government provides support for infrastructure, but it doesn't pay for the programs that we have here on the grounds. That is done by the Eisenhower Foundation. So the Eisenhower Foundation still plays a pivotal role here at the library.
Sure.
They are instrumental in raising funds for programs that we wouldn't be able to put on because we don't raise money. That's the foundation that does that.
I'm aware of that, Carl, and that's tremendous. We need to take a little break, and we'll be right back. Stay tuned. You're watching Hey, Whatever Happened to Dwight Eisenhower. We'll be right back.
Hey, whatever happened to you?
Welcome back to Hey, Whatever Happened to Dwight Eisenhower. And we're at the Presidential Library visiting with Carl Weisenbach. We're talking about, of course, Dwight Eisenhower, the whole purpose of this entire complex. If I'm out in Hayes or Goodland, I'm watching this show and I say, I did not realize that this complex was here. And I decided, let's take a family trip Sunday and come out. What would I expect to see if I came out to the complex?
You could expect to see a world-class exhibit. In other words, you don't have to go to Washington to see a world-class exhibit. What we have here in our museum, Boyhood Home, and so forth, is similar to what you'll find at every other presidential library. Of course, with the understanding that we're the only presidential library that operate the Boyhood Home, which is a special treat.
Speaking of the Boyhood Home, can you go through the Boyhood Home?
Yes, you can. You can.
And that's amazing, because you can walk through the home that Eisenhower was raised in. Him and his family. His family became, all of the siblings became famous in their own right. And
right.
we could have done a whole show on, picked out any of the family.
Oh, exactly.
And have done the same thing. So they have a tremendous history of their own. But they had to get that from somewhere. Who was the influence? Of course, the mother and father. But was Mom the one that gave the religious training to the kids, or Dad?
I would say it's probably the mother. Right? I think the father gave the discipline, kept the boys in line, and as well as you can imagine, that might have been a little bit difficult with so many boys running around a relatively small house. In fact, there's a good book called At Ease. It's a story I tell my friends, written by Ike, right? And he talks about growing up in Abilene in that little house. So if anybody's really interested in learning more about growing up in Abilene and what it meant to the president, right? That's a unique book to get in our gift shop. Now, that wasn't a plug for the gift shop.
Well, that's not a bad idea, because you do have a gift shop, and it's fully equipped.
Exactly.
It's right here on the grounds. It's not too far from the Boyhood Home.
Exactly.
And then you've got the chapel.
We got the chapel where the president is buried, along with Mamie and their firstborn child. And you know, we do have a lot of people that come on campus, you know, just to see the place of meditation. But yet we have some people that just come here just to go to the Boyhood Home, while others like to go through the museum.
What will I find in the museum? Is it traditionally World War II exhibits?
Well, here's the interesting paradox, if you will, right? By 1945, Eisenhower was already a world hero. You can build a huge museum around him, which they tried to do at the time. They actually had to add additions, you know, because of Eisenhower's, you know, popularity and so forth. They're running out of space, right? But he also became a two-term president. So you have to find a middle ground. You have to create galleries that focus on Eisenhower as military leader, Eisenhower as Supreme Allied Commander, Eisenhower as military governor of Germany, Eisenhower as head of NATO, right? All that has to be addressed in the museum. But then you address the presidency. So you have to kind of put together a mix, if you will, that gives the museum visitor a pretty broad understanding of Eisenhower's military career and his presidency. And I think perhaps more importantly, about his continued relevancy, his continued, you know, legacy. And that's what you're going to find when you come to Abilene. And I think you'll have a better understanding as to why Eisenhower is considered to be one of the top 10 presidents of the United States. And you'll get that by going through the museum. And now to really showcase the Eisenhower military legacy, we have a wonderful temporary exhibit on World War II, Eisenhower and World War II Remembered, which doesn't try to retell the story of Eisenhower. It tries to, it tells part of the story of the Second World War and Eisenhower's role, but it also focuses on people who made a difference in the Second World War, right? Like the Tuskegee Airmen, the Ritchie Boys. It talks about you know, where Eisenhower was at a particular time in the Second World War. You actually get a chronology of the Second World War, and you have different options. You can just come in and look at the chronology, or you can come in and look at some of the artifacts that are on display, or if you really have an intense interest in the Second World War, you can focus on, you know, many posters, if you will, and so forth about General Eisenhower during the Second World War. And it's a 3-year exhibit.
One of the things, Carl, so we don't run out of time on this segment, but you and I will continue to talk afterwards, and they'll be able to go to the website and pick up that information. But one of the things here at the library is the research aspect of it.
I think most of our visitors who come here are primarily interested in the museum. However, this is also a world-class research institution. In fact, 2 years ago, we set an all-time record, for a number of researchers, on-site researchers. And it looks like we may set a new all-time record again for on-site researchers. And that usually happens at the beginning, of a presidential library. This is happening 50 years after Eisenhower has been in office. What does a researcher do here? Well, they have an option of going through 28 million pages to learn about Eisenhower. In other words, we have
28 million?
We have about 28 million pages, give or take, 1,000 or two, right, of pages here at the Presidential Library. They can study anything from Eisenhower's military record to his presidential documents, and they do. They come out and do papers, books, articles, you name it, on the rich holdings that we have here at the Presidential Library. In fact, we have a staff.
Let me stop you for a second because we're going to run out of time on this show. You've been watching Hey, Whatever Happened to Dwight Eisenhower, and I'm in Abilene, Kansas, visiting with Carl Weisenbach, who's the director of the facility. If you can't tell, there's an awful lot here to see. Come on out and take a look at it. And if you want to hear more of this interview, Carl and I are going to continue to talk, and you can go to the website at heywhateverhappenedto.org because Carl and I are going to continue to talk. Thanks for watching.
Bye, everybody.